Hello everyone, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind. I'm your host, James W. Jesso. This is a bonus episode. It's not a part of the typical curation of interviews. It's not even really an interview. It's a conversation. It's a conversation with a former guest of the show, Chad Charles, from episode 113, Building Best Practices with 5-MeO-DMT, and it is a conversation specifically about Leo Gura's recent video, outrageous experiments in consciousness, which is Gura's video of consuming, we don't know if he smoked it, 5-MeO-DMT every day for 30 days while isolated. And the discussion, although understandably goes into a deconstruction of Leo's work as a whole and of his public persona, his teaching persona, the discussion specifically goes into an aspect of this video, sort of a core aspect of this video, which Chad and I both agreed was very, very dangerous and needed to be addressed publicly. So that's what this is. It's a discussion with Chad and myself on this dangerous aspect of the outrageous experiments in consciousness video, while also, couching that in a general sort of discussion about Leo and his work, and a general discussion about what we really valued in outrageous experiments in consciousness. Now, you may or may not know Leo Gura at all. That does not matter. I think you'll still get some interesting pieces out of this discussion. And hopefully, if you haven't watched this video yet, this will inspire you to do so, because it's actually incredibly beautiful, his outrageous experiments in consciousness, with this caveat that there's also something incredibly dangerous present in there as well. So there's not much more to say here. I'll say thank you to my patrons on Patreon for helping to make this show possible. And it's a bonus episode, so I won't go too deep. I won't do my normal thing. But if you're not a patron and you'd like to become one, please do. I'd be stoked. You can do so at patreon.com/James W. Jesso. I'll talk a little bit more about this after this discussion with Chad Charles about Leo Gura's outrageous experiments in consciousness. Enjoy. All right. How you feeling? You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Well, here we are. This isn't really a podcast so much. It might be. I don't know. We might chat for a while.
Okay.
And we're here because you recently contacted me asking me if I knew of Leo Gura. I said yes. I said I don't particularly like the guy personally, but I hadn't listened to him in some time. My initial encounters with him felt like he was in this weird intersection of like internet famous, cult of personality, and like spiritual awakening, entrepreneurialism, that just didn't really vibe with me necessarily. And then you said, well, have you seen his most recent video? I said, no, I don't give him the time of day. I don't really like him, right? And you said something along the lines of, his most recent video is about him smoking 5-MeO-DMT every day for 30 days, and that, and I'm paraphrasing you here, that it is one of the most apt or clear descriptions of what the 5-MeO-DMT experience is like, and he seems to be indirectly promoting something extremely dangerous. And so I listened to it, and I saw in it a bunch of stuff that a bunch of the things that I did not like about his previous work. And I felt profoundly moved listening to the video in a way that I was like, whoa, yeah, like I was having my own sort of like remembering awakenings, to use his language, that I've had previous in my life that was like, oh yeah, fuck, I forgot.
Yeah.
I forgot, And here we are to talk about it. In particular, wanting for you, and I offered this to say, like, let's get on the podcast and talk about why you see some of the things he's saying here as dangerous. So that being the preamble, where do you want to go today, Chad?
Well, there's a lot of different branches to go off of, but just speaking about that word dangerous. Um, there's something to the usage of 5-MeO-DMT alone with a particular setting that I think is straight up dangerous, and why it's worthwhile talking about in the wake of that video or after having seen that video is that, on a personal note, that's exactly how a very good friend of mine passed away, left this realm. And in that community, I got the feeling that there were two perspectives of that death. One was a tragic accident, and one was a glamorization of what one wants to imagines or wishes or hopes that my friend experienced. And so when I saw the video of Leo Gura, I was familiar with his work and have seen him over the years, and learned about, 30 days in a bathtub. It touched me personally because of my friend, and I thought to myself, wow, this person has, close to 1 million followers, and tens of thousands of people are seeing this video, and there's something sensitive there for me, and that's what interests me the most. And there's lots of other branches about how he describes his experience. I don't know if that might be a part of the conversation, but the primary part is that dangerous piece. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I mean, you talking about your close friend here also connects for myself with a former colleague of mine. Listeners of the show would know I made a video about it, what happened to Tobias, who was a Kambo practitioner who got very heavy into Bufo and ended up taking his own life by jumping off a roof, in the midst of what, from the outside, in my perspective, appeared to be a drug-induced delusional psychosis, brought on likely by excessive use of 5-MeO-DMT, reportedly anywhere from once a day to multiple times a day at very high doses. Likely not, to Leo Gura's credit, likely not in a very specific time-restricted retreat type thing where it was like, I am doing this intentional experiment for this many days, this many times, in this context. More of an increasing usage, as far as I know, and a lot of other social and psychological factors, which I talk about in that video. So I see that the danger of excessive use coming up, along with the danger of being in a bathtub, because although, and we'll talk about some of the things that he said that you felt, attempted to harm reduce, but doesn't, in his sharing. But taking psychedelics, taking drugs in the bathtub alone is generally not a good idea. Many people have died. I mean, one of the infamous D.M. Turner, who, literally wrote the book on combining drugs, was an incredibly, subculturally well-renowned psychonaut, died in his bathtub, high on ketamine, because he was doing ketamine in the bath. John C. Lilly almost died in the bath with ketamine. Now, ketamine and 5-MeO are different things, but generally, when you take a substance that incapacitates your normal ability to recognize what's happening in the reality of your physical body in any body of water without somebody there, you're taking a serious risk with your life.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. And so when I saw Leo Gura's video, on one hand, I was so happy that I was watching that video, because it means nothing happened.
Right.
Nothing tragic happened. And when I say tragic, I guess that would be my opinion of what's happening when somebody would not come back, so to speak, not come back into their body. effectively die, as we know what death to be when we're no longer, this body is not functioning. And so what got me in the video was he's sharing his methods. Basically, I'm going into the bathtub and I'm doing this every day, and somehow voluntarily being defensive. Like, it's not full of water, and like you can't drown. It's not reckless. It's not reckless. I've done this a lot of times, and I've done a lot of work on myself, and this isn't reckless. So just leave it at that. Somewhere later in the video, I can't remember where, saying that, be careful or something like that. There was almost like a token gesture of caution that seemed to be a snippet of like, oh right, who's watching this, who's learning from me, and that didn't seem, I don't know, enough. And so I guess I thought to myself when I watched the video, wow, it, just as he said himself in the video, we could have been reading a report that Leo Gura died in his bathtub.
Was found dead in his bathtub with drugs in his
Right.
system, kind of thing.
Right. And it could have went either way. I imagine that. I don't know, I wasn't there, but with my knowledge of 5-MeO-DMT, the one thing that one common thing, or maybe the only thing that I know, is that it is utterly unpredictable. And I've said this before. It's a dissociative substance. So there's a likelihood that dissociation can happen. And, we can be careful with dosages, and we're like, wow, this isn't going to happen like this. And I've done this a lot, and I know what this dose is going to do, and I know how to navigate it, etc. And that was exactly the case of my friend who died in the bathtub in the same way. Very experienced, lots of experience, had done it many times. And for some reason, at that moment, at that time, my guess is dissociation happened, and he drowned in his tub. And what that links to in Leo's talk is this, I said it before, glamorization of what we can achieve in with that substance, the states of consciousness we can achieve, and that there's this choice. And he mentions it himself in the video, the Mahasamadhi, that you come to this place, you come to this point, as if there's a point in time and space, but we're just using words here to describe what can't really be described, where there's seemingly a choice to return, or a choice to die, actually die. That the source of consciousness is released from the body, and the body will no longer function. And in the case of my friend who actually did die that way, the glamorization of it is that, that must be what happened. That must be what he worked so hard on himself. He used the substance so much, he mastered it. And when it came to the point of choice, he consciously chose to leave his body. And Leo speaks of having been presented with that choice, and he decided not to, and he goes on at length about why he didn't. It was an unexpected choice. He didn't expect to be making that choice at that time, so he decided to come back. And objectively, no one can say whether that's true or not. However, as far as I know, I've never heard of anybody using 5-MeO-DMT, apart from losing the function of their body and something happening, or some sort of physiological malfunction. nobody doesn't come back. Everybody comes back. And many people will describe that choice. They will describe that choice. It was like I could have chose to die, completely die in that moment, but I chose to come back. Beautiful choice. And seemingly nobody has made the choice to die. And what I know in the case of my friend is that there seemed to be a putting my friend on a pedestal, perhaps, of like, it was done, it can be done, and it can be done if he could do it, I could do it. If I follow in the steps here, I can reach this place. And so there's an indirect and perhaps unintended user manual that is being offered in Leo Gura's video. And I don't know, I wouldn't say it's alarming, but I would say it's of concern.
Well, I would agree, and I feel like on a personal level, I would not like to see any of my contemporaries, whether I like them or not. I mean, maybe actually Leo and I would be good buds, if I knew him personally, but whether or not I like what they're producing or not, I would not want to see any of them come to harm or die as a consequence of an experiment gone wrong, or maybe subjectively gone terribly right. I don't know. I would not want to see that happen. And yet I respect his ability to say, this is what I'm going to try. I'm going to experiment with this, and I'm going to take this risk. Psychologically, he took the risk of smoking 5-MeO-DMT every day. Physically, he took the risk of doing it in his bathtub. Now, having listened to it, and especially the latter part of the video, really appreciating what he brought back for all of us. The way that he brings up that I was doing it in the bathtub, and then, like you said, becomes self-aware of a defensiveness about it having been done safely, and that he has a lot of experience, and that he wouldn't do reckless stuff, and that it's not dangerous at all, it's safe. The way that he does that, he might believe that, but he disregards the fact that it is truly actually quite a dangerous thing that he's doing. Now, even though he said later on, he does say something like, that you're listening to this video rather than finding out that, I was found dead in a bathtub, which is him basically suggesting, yes, that could have happened, whether it be because I chose to liberate myself from the cycle of death and rebirth and 3D reality, or because he went unconscious and drowned. There's an awareness of that having been an option. Now, him stating it as like, this is my choice, he kind of puts it into this framework of like, he's not telling you to do this. However, and this is one of the things that I don't like about Leo's work, is that even though he presents it this way, I think his own sort of attachment to the achievement of liberation, of awakening and knowledge of truth, starts to filter out in the way he's saying things. At times when he makes you statements about you experiences, and you will experience that, and your awakening and your quest for truth, there are times that he says that the way he utilizes the second person touches me incredibly in a positive way. And other times, the way that it comes out, he actually means him. The reality is, it's not you, it's me and mine and I. And then in those times, and the achievement orientation is filtering out through the second person, and it is not necessarily a description of what's happening. In some sense, it's a charge or a challenge as to your commitment to truth and your commitment to awakening that comes with a value basis of more awakening equals better, equals good, equals worthy, equals so on and so forth. Now that sort of subtext in the context of smoking 5-MeO-DMT alone 30 days in a row, while also explicitly saying, other people haven't gone here. You have to do this to go there, essentially, even though he later says, well, maybe you don't. Throughout the whole thing, he's saying you have to, and if you haven't, you didn't. He's charging you. He's saying, I charge onto you the challenge. How awakened do you want to be? While also saying, it's safe. I have a lot of experience. It's not reckless. It's not dangerous at all for me.
Yeah.
So he's essentially, he's indirectly inviting people and challenging them to do something that is incredibly dangerous.
Yes, I agree with you. And so 2 things I wanted to say. First, I don't know if he's vaporizing or smoking Bufo in the bathtub. My guess is that he's actually taking it in a different way, and that's why he's in a bathtub. My guess is he's taking it rectally.
Couldn't he also be insufflating it, like intranasal 5-MeO DMT?
Sure, there's multiple ways. It could be IM, intramuscular, it could be IV, it could be insufflation, it could be rectally, it could be smoked. So he doesn't actually explicitly state what he's doing, but my guess is it might be rectally, especially when he speaks to the length of time that he's feeling the effect. In any case, or the second thing that I wanted to say is I would have a different response to that video if Leo was perhaps, and who knows, maybe he is, I don't really know, if he was a practitioner, like a sort of therapist or a clinician of 5-MeO DMT, where he would be inviting people into a safe container for which to have experiences to securely and explore what 5-MeO DMT brings us into. However, his approach is a psychonautic approach. My guess is that many who are watching him are also perhaps experimenting with themselves with other substances. It's a psychonautic approach. And so what you're saying, what that charge is for somebody to do it alone. And it would be different for me if there was an encouragement perhaps to have a sitter, create a safe setting, go and see somebody who has a lot of experience in offering this to you so that you can go there. That would change a lot for me in the way that I receive that. There would be a degree of responsibility, perhaps, in the whole discourse, because what he's describing and what he gets out of it and what he shares and expresses, I mean, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. The way that he describes the indescribable is as good as I've heard or seen it. Mm-hmm. And what he's getting out of it is like, yes, this is what we all want to see each other living in: joy, love, ecstasy, compassion, forgiveness, all of that. That's
deep
awesome.
Surrender.
Yeah, deep surrender. Yes. And he does it so well. But like you said earlier, it's almost as if there's this challenge to go and like, let's challenge each other to be the best humans. Absolutely. And at the same time, that was his experience. And this is not a cookie cutter experience the way that I know this in offering it to others. And each person will have their own journey, for lack of a better word. And this is one person's journey. I believe, or my take on it is that what he's describing is the fullest expression of what can be experienced with 5-MeO DMT. And he does it really well. Like I have a presentation where I call it effing the ineffable. Well, Leo F's the ineffable in this video as good as anybody does, as far as I'm concerned. And it's gold.
Yeah.
It's gold.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. And there's this other layer where it's like, in that there are things like simply being the case doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't room and reason to deconstruct some of the things that he's saying around his descriptions of the ineffable, and the way he presents his method for having touched that place. You know, that we are, there's warrant in us deconstructing and criticizing some of those things for the safety. And in some sense, I feel like in a way that hopefully will even further increase the value of that video. Because now there's also okay, good. You know, like, yeah, okay. Now I'm not confused by the fact that it's likely not a good idea to smoke 5-MeO DMT every day for 30 days alone in a bathtub. Likely that's not a safe choice. Leo seemed to think it was safe for himself. That clearly in the physically, in the long run, on the other side of it, that was an accurate assessment on his part. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the chances weren't incredibly high that he would have died, and the consequences of that would have been profound suffering for all the people around him, his followers and his friends and his family.
Yeah. Yes. There's something like the gold in what he has described is, the value of it is, somehow diminished by the entirety of it, and sharing in the way that he's sharing how he approached that. And because I would love to share that video. I would love to, like, I have a list of resources that I offer people that is kind of curated, in the sense that, you can go and Google 5-MeO DMT and you're going to find a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I help people just kind of like, here's what I think are healthy, responsible, kind of cogent and coherent resources that is really all you need. And I have never used any of Leo Gura's material when he talks about 5-MeO DMT because of this reason. There's this, like, yes, there's this potential there. Yes, I do encourage people to use it. I think it's a wonderful, I mean, I don't even know what to say. Wonderful doesn't seem to say it all, but I believe strongly in the potential of this substance. And yet I wouldn't include this video as a resource for somebody coming into it. And that's a shame. It's a shame that I wouldn't feel comfortable because there's so much goodness in it, and yet there's so much the challenge and the charge that is infused with it. I just have a no. Mm-hmm. And yet here we are talking about it, and other people will watch us talking about it, and it's kind of making it bigger than it is at some level too. So I'm aware of the commentary and the critique that we have, and I think it's valid and worthy. And at the same time, I'm also aware of the possibility that it's enabling something just by having this conversation, and it maybe being shared publicly.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying there, and personally, I feel like it still makes sense to have the conversation, because it's like, man, I got 16K followers. He's got 1 million. You know, I'm not boosting his profile.
Right,
you know, if anything, I'm parasiting his popularity simply by making this. You know, or some people might think so. But I think that this video in particular, it is valuable, and I think that people listening to it is a positive thing. And I feel like people also, maybe afterwards or before getting it, maybe our conversation here becomes the reason they listen to that video. The caveat is there, and they're listening for this other thing. But they're listening for this other thing that was based on our criticisms, with us also being very open and very confident, saying, and it's beautiful. And despite the fact that it was dangerous and it was presented poorly, his dangerous choices were not presented from like a self-aware harm reduction sort of rhetoric. You know, they were courageous decisions that pushed him beyond which, I mean, fair to say, beyond which most humans will ever experience, and
Right.
brought it back for the rest of us. And that is a service that he has done for us. And I think that's positive. And there are these other things that need to be talked about and is good for us to talk about.
Sure.
Yeah.
And actually, what you said there reminded me of a peer of mine who had a different perspective and a different opinion that there's not so much, I don't know about value, but there's something misplaced about the attempt to describe this experience. And he brought it up in the way of, I think he said, holos obscures logos. So in other words, all the words will obscure the purity of the experience.
Hmm.
And yet we do. That's what we're doing. We're trying to express. We're trying to connect. I'm trying to transmit something to you, felt experience, so that you can understand it. And we're good at it as humans. And yet, describing this is really difficult. Now, why that touches me is because most of the time, when I do wade through the internet and on a Google search or something like that, most of the time, the trip reports or what people want to share is when they have had, say, an experience like Leo has. The experience, the fullest expression, the way that I put it, of the experience, the love, the unity, the oneness, and the expectation that creates for others going into it is, in my experience when working with others, it's enormous. To the point where they might come up with shadow material, or it might be really difficult for them. And then there's this aspect of like, oh, I did it wrong. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
I didn't have the experience that Leo had. I must not be doing something right, or something's wrong with me, or something like that. And so there's another tinge of that too. That doesn't mean to say we shouldn't describe the beauty that we've just, and then share with others like what that has brought into our lives. Awesome. And a degree of discernment helps to balance the aspirations that people have in coming to this.
Mm-hmm.
And if the aspirations are about achieving something, what do I want to say about this? I think that I would question what do we really want from an experience like this? And the intention to either simply explore the psyche or consciousness itself, or to self-actualize, as Leo would put it, to bring the so-called lessons from experiences that we have in expanded states of consciousness into our daily lives. If there's broader aspirations that, I'll put it this way, as far as I can see in Leo's discourse, not just in this particular video, but in the years past, that there is a sort of self-aggrandizement here in the doubting of other teachers that have chosen to share what they've gotten out of, let's say, a non-dual experience, and almost challenging all other teachers that he himself has achieved what no other human has achieved or gotten to. And as gold and as beautiful as Leo's description is, frankly, in my experience, it doesn't sound like he's experiencing anything different than what any other person I've seen and watched and sat for in this experience. They might not be able to articulate it as well as him, but if we're coming back to loving presence, joy, um, grace, forgiveness, these are things that are accessible at all times. We don't need any substance to achieve the basic human qualities that would probably make this life a much easier and enjoyable place to be and live in.
Well, I hear that, and also he makes it clear that it seems like he's making it clear that that's not what he's trying to achieve. That's not what he's moving towards. He's moving towards like truth, capital T truth, full awakening. And that is the apex top of a mountain, and that's where he's headed. That's what he's seeking towards. And that's why all these other spiritual teachers fall short, because, I mean, my interpretation of what he's saying here, is that because they're stopping somewhere before the peak of that mountain.
Right. And kind of discrediting any teachings that might come from a lower, level or dimension of realization.
And I think I don't think he's doing that explicitly. It's interesting because you hear him attempt to say he's not doing that, while also the subtext is that that's what he's doing. So I think he's aware that this type, like the way he's presenting things, can be received this way, and it's going to be received this way because that's what he's doing, but then, and tries to speak to that, but then ultimately, does it anyways. And this is what I said about how I could see his own striving, the striving to win, to succeed, to be the best, to accomplish, to acquire. It's very American, actually. It's like American spirituality, like to be the most awake. And I see that. And I also see that he efforts towards bringing that back for people, and I appreciate that.
Yes.
And then, like I said before, it's also mixed up in this weird sort of like cult of personality thing on the internet, which, I mean, like, I am as subject to as he is. Fair enough, But it's I feel like I got lost in the comments I was making there. It's in this, I got lost in the comments I was making there. I'll pretend like getting lost didn't happen, and the last thing I said was a concluding statement to my point.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take that. I guess what I'd like to say also is that I rejoice in Leo's experiment and what that video and what's coming out of it, because for me, when I saw it, I was like, yes, he got it. He got, I don't know, the cosmic joke. He got the perhaps the peak potential of what that has to offer. And I saw him humbled. I saw him at least more humbled than I'd ever seen him in any other video.
Yeah.
And I rejoiced at that because I thought, yes, and as he says at the end of the video, this will probably change my teachings. And I trust it will. I hope so. And it doesn't discredit any of his teachings before, and it doesn't discredit any other teachings coming from any other level of realization. They're all valid. There's a particular perspective of coming from a felt and direct experience with the singularity. And it seems to include all other perspectives. And I guess the egoic or maybe American taint on that is that, well, if my perspective includes all these other ones, then all of these fall short of the truth. And so what I have to teach is coming from actual truth. And there's a placing oneself on a pedestal at this point. And if he really, it's as it sounds, if he just had that experience after all of his years of using 5-MeO DMT, which always had that potential at any time, now he got it. And in the days following it, He's sharing it in a very raw and vulnerable way. It's beautiful.
Mm.
And I doubt that the humbling will stop.
Well, we'll see. We'll see, because he like James Orrock said, the ego's like a muscle. You break it down and it comes back stronger. And we've seen this type of breaking it down and coming back stronger despite doing multiple 5-MeO sessions in a variety of sort of like 5 celebrities, like 5 anti-celebrities, like Octavio, for example, right? Or Dr. Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
There's a breaking down, but then there's other layers where it's almost like the having touched the fullest expression of that experience somehow works as a way to now, on maybe a subconscious level, validate all these other behaviors. There's no more work to be done, kind of thing. And this is one of the things that I've seen with 5-MeO DMT when I hear people talk about it, that I hear ends up being something really positive for them, realizing like, I'm already loved, like the way Leo talked about, which is like this game, this challenge back and forth with God, being like, God loves me this much, and so I try to love God even more, and it loves me even more, and blah blah blah. And at some point you realize it even loves my inability to love myself. And I mean, that really struck me. Like, I cried, listening to it, because I'm like, oh yeah, I remember, right?
Yes. Yes.
That type of experience can lead people to be like I'm already beautiful. Like I don't need to be on this quest to make myself worthy of love. And yet it could also land in the sense of, I don't need to do any more work back in 3D because I'm already loved. Because the thing is, like, yes, you are already loved, and you likely got a bunch of fucking shitty behaviors that you should probably like do your best to like do some deep, basement cleaning so that it's no longer negatively impacting your ability to be in healthy generative relationships, and have healthy generative impact on people around you. Now, that might not be the case for Leo. He might end up being fully humbled and stay with that. And he might also not. I don't know. We have yet to see. In having made that video, I think it was like he said at least a week or a couple weeks after he had these experiences, which maybe we could talk about his reactivations after this. After having these experiences, possibly this will only continue, and it will humble him more and more and more every day as he starts to learn how to live in 3D. I mean, I'm using this language kind of playfully, but it also works, with having experienced that. And it's possible that the old ego structures that defined Leo then, I mean, like prior to, will now define Leo in the future, wrapped around some sort of superiority of having achieved the apex of truth, or having touched the apex of truth. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, now we're really like, I'm describing this in a way that's almost like rather cavalier, maybe slightly disrespectful, sort of breaking down Leo's sort of personality. I'm also aware that I don't know him as a person. I only know his professional persona, and that's what I'm talking about here. But we don't know yet. I saw him humbled in that video too. And yet whether or not that prevails, I think will be seen in times to come. And yeah.
No doubt. And what came to mind when you were saying that was this old adage, when the ceremony ends, the ceremony begins. And so what this brings to mind for me is the importance of integration. Now, anybody who has ever seen like Leo's website, I mean, it's full of resources. Here's somebody who has an enormous toolkit of resources. Awesome. Now, somebody who is perhaps wanting to follow in the footsteps of doing this themselves on their own, in a bathtub or not, and having that potential peak experience with 5-MeO DMT, having days, if not weeks, of reactivations, for example, and there's no container, there's no guidance. That's where I come back to uh, at least with this substance, the importance of having somebody there with you, preferably somebody who has some experience with people having strong, if not peak experiences with the substance. Uh, Preferably, perhaps, somebody who can also carry that person beyond the peak experience and into the ongoing process of awakening, or, in other words, taking self-realization as a state moment and having it land as a station.
Hmm.
Self-realization coming into self-actualization, and of course that's what Leo's whole thing is. And all of that, there's preparedness, so there's preparation coming into a peak experience like that, and then there's what's coming after. And so as the ceremony continues for him, or with anybody who's had a peak experience with 5-MeO DMT, it's like it doesn't just stop. Mm-hmm. In my experience, the lessons are continually there. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they come abruptly and spontaneously, and they're confusing. And do we have the resources to make meaning of them? Do we have the resources to harness what is there and really apply it in our lives in a fruitful and healthy way?
Yeah, I mean those are good questions. I mean that goes back to your body of work as well, on a sort of like quasi public / this is the second time you've been openly a public speaker on a thing, and yet privately you've been helping people build communities of accountability and mutual support for integration practices and best practices as facilitators. And yeah, so I wonder now. Oh, starting to lose my plot a little bit. I feel self-aware and embarrassed about having lost the plot a little bit, because there's something hanging from several minutes ago that I want to speak to, that just kind of like rushed in and took everything else out of the way. It's like, no, we're talking about this now.
Okay.
There was something you'd said there about how the words, simply having described the experience, the words can never encapsulate the experience, right? Like the speaking of the experience obfuscates the actual experience on some level, right?
Yeah.
And yet I feel as though the value of speaking it well, I mean, there's an integrative value of being able to bring it into words and share it with other people and be seen and blah, blah, blah. But in Leo's position as, a teacher, but also in that context, very much a storyteller, is to utilize words to approximate the experience close enough that it invites us into a taste of what it might have been for him. And in doing so, through mirror neurons and interpersonal subjectivity, or the intersubjective web of storyteller to audience participant, we touch that place too. Or at the very least, it rings a little bell inside of us. We start to have sympathetic resonance to whatever it is that he experienced, that he is now pointing to with words that calls us into the experience. And in his description of that fullest expression in his experience of love and God, that is something that is of full value. And so despite the fact that chances are, even as he was describing it on your description very well, there must have been a part of him too that also felt like he was still falling short, and fair enough.
Sure. And we will, because, and he says this is like, at that state, or at that state of consciousness, you're not in full function of your body and what it can do. And so we can't describe it in that moment. The describer has merged with anything that it can be described, so that it can describe. So there is no words at that moment. And so, what's the saying? Like all the fingers are pointing to the moon. And it's, the words are the fingers, and they're pointing towards what we can't say or speak. And I know that I've been trying to F the ineffable for a long time, and it's always falling short. And yet it's fun to try. And I think of some of the more, I don't know, inspiring voices out there. I'm thinking James Orrock or Martin Ball or the Tea Fairy, even Robert Masters. Like, wow, they describe this experience so well. There's not many people who can do it that well. Mm-hmm. And it can be fun, it can be inspiring, it can be enlightening. And yes, I think we are taking away from that. We are sharing this experience, and Leo describes as well. We're transmitting an experience just by sharing it in the way we can, and doing it verbally is one way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's maybe come to a close here, because the Sure. initial premise here, the intention here was to basically point out something that was dangerous, that he was through subtext indirectly promoting on some level, which was smoking 5-MeO DMT by yourself in a bathtub, which, I mean, the TLDR at the end of this video is that's not safe, despite how safe Leo seemed to present it as being for himself. It's probably not a good idea. If you do it, please recognize that it's actually a risk you're taking with your life. And if you're willing to take that risk, okay, hopefully you're considering the people around you who would care if you died. But if you're choosing to take that risk consciously, okay, but know that it is a risk, and it's likely one that you don't have to take to touch the place that Leo is talking about. It can be touched with a safe guide, with a safe container, and with lower doses, well, maybe not lower doses, but like less frequent doses of 5-MeO DMT. And to be mindful not to fall into the I am trying to achieve the apex of truth treadmill, or whatever it is, or trap. Try not to fall into that as best you can as you're on your spiritual journey, curiously exploring the potentials of 5-MeO DMT.
Well said, simply said, really all that needs to be said right there.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Chad, is there, I mean, having said that that's all that needs to be said, is there anything you want to leave us with before we close this off?
Yeah. I guess it's for those of us who are seeking truth, that there are truths to be sought. There are truths to be directly experienced. And those of us who have the courage to do that with substances, the psychonauts, are pioneers in discovering the frontiers. Not that it hasn't been done before, but as we do that for ourselves and we share it with others, there is a collective awakening that I think is happening. And I believe that one of the most important takeaways, teachings, lessons, what have you, that comes from that, the peak of that apex, the summit of what we're seemingly climbing towards or going to, is that we come back, we're here in this body, and we spend most of our time in this body. So we take care of it, and we take care of this. And if we're going towards the apex, the summit of truth, in a way that is reckless, it kind of defeats the whole point. Because once we get to the apex, we realize, wow, this is what it's all about right here, right now. This is the experience I'm having. Why would I risk it just to find out that it was all about this anyway?
Mm. Yeah, nice. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate
Thank you.
you initiating this conversation and for the larger things that you're doing for 5-MeO DMT culture and for the people who are choosing to experiment and explore, and for our continued friendship. Thanks.
Likewise. Thank you so very much. I love being friends with you.
Thanks, Chad. And cut. Cool. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode, bonus episode of Adventures Through the Mind. If you've never tuned in before, if you just kind of fell into this based in being interested in Leo Gura's work, please follow the channel, subscribe to the channel, follow the show. I like to think that we're bringing a really positive quality of discourse to topics relevant to psychedelic culture. And if you're interested in Leo Gura, you likely would be interested in what we got going on here at Adventures Through the Mind. So please subscribe if you're on YouTube, or just follow this show wherever you're following it, Spotify, iTunes, whatever. Subscribe, please. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you are not yet a patron of the show, you'd like to support the show, Patreon's a great way to do it. It's a weird economic time, pandemic and all the rest, which puts a lot of people in very awkward situations financially, even myself a little bit, because I would offset or supplement my podcasting income with touring and selling books and doing talks that would help sort of make up for not making fully a living wage month to month, which is blocked for me now. So if you are not in a compromised economic situation and you're willing and able to help the show, becoming a patron would be really great. Even as little as a cup of coffee once a month goes a long way. So that'd be awesome. Patreon.com/Jesso, link in the description. So again, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. As a little treat for having listened all the way to the end, here's a completely unrelated section from completely unrelated clip of conversation between Chad and I that happened after the interview was over for your humorous enjoyment or whatever. So yeah, thank you very much. And I will see you on the next episode of Adventures Through the Mind. Take care. Cool, man.
Awesome.
It's done.
Cool.
Well, I mean, the recording's done. Now all the post-production and the blah, blah, blah follows.
The blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks,
I feel like that was good, man. I'm really glad that you initiated this idea. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see if I get a bunch of haters. We'll see if I don't know. We'll see.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's a polemic somehow, but you brought it back. It's the basic message is, play safe.
Right.
Really, like it goes back to the public service announcements, play safe, or whatever they were in Canada.
I don't remember.
No, you remember? Don't remember this robot who was like, and then lost like the robot arm or whatever, and they would be like, "Just safe."
Oh yeah, it was like, I remember being like, "Whoa, this was so cool," because it was like future robot and it was doing all these like flips and tricks like through these like giant sawmills and stuff, and then it lost its arm, and it was like, remember, you can't just put your arm back on. I remember that fucking me up as a kid. I was like, "Oh, it was so cool," and then being like, "Oh, not cool." Oh wow, yeah, nice. Thanks for that memory.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll let you go here. And then I might actually, after my outro bit, include this little laughing piece.
Why not?